Emily Carter adjusted the strap of her modest black dress as she stood outside Le Jardin, one of the most expensive restaurants in Manhattan, feeling entirely out of place. The glass facade gleamed in the early evening light, and through the tall windows she could see men in tailored suits and women in gowns that looked pulled straight from glossy magazines. Her hands trembled as she checked her phone one last time, rereading the message from her best friend Sophie, who had arranged the blind date. Sophie had insisted this was her chance to meet someone wonderful, someone who could finally treat her the way she deserved, after years of overwork and heartbreak. Still, Emily could not shake the nerves. She worked long hours as a junior designer at Blackwell Innovations by day and took on small freelance projects at night, just to keep up with rent in her tiny Brooklyn apartment. The idea of stepping into a place where the cheapest entree probably cost more than her entire weekly grocery budget felt surreal. She had spent 2 hours getting ready, straightening her chestnut hair, and carefully applying makeup she had learned from YouTube tutorials, trying to look like she belonged, even though she knew she did not. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the heavy glass doors and was immediately greeted by the soft notes of a piano drifting across the polished marble lobby. The maitre d' gave her a practiced smile, one that made her suddenly aware of the scuffed heels she had borrowed from Sophie. "Table 15, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. She was directed through the sea of glittering chandeliers and hushed conversations, her heart pounding so loudly she thought everyone could hear it. Each step made her wonder what kind of man Sophie had set her up with. Would he be kind or arrogant, genuine or fake? She hoped for kindness more than anything. Finally, she spotted a man seated alone near the window, his back straight, his suit impeccable even from behind. Gathering her courage, Emily approached. "I am so sorry I am late," she blurted out as she slipped into the seat across from him, clutching her purse like a lifeline. The bus was delayed and traffic was terrible. Her words trailed off the moment he looked up. The man before her was not at all what she expected. He had sharp features softened by warm brown eyes, and a calm smile that seemed to carry a weight of quiet assurance. There was no sign of the nervous anticipation she imagined she would find on a blind date. Instead, there was composure, elegance, and something magnetic she could not define. "No problem at all," he said smoothly. "I just arrived myself." Emily blinked, thrown off balance. The certainty in his tone suggested he was not waiting for her at all. Before she could correct the mistake, the waiter appeared with a bottle of wine and addressed the man as Mr. Blackwell. Emily froze. The name struck her like a bell. Blackwell, the same as the company where she spent her days, buried in endless tasks, always working under pressure, always unseen. She glanced at him again and suddenly realized she was sitting across from Adrian Blackwell, the enigmatic CEO, whose face she had only glimpsed in corporate newsletters and finance magazines. Panic and disbelief tangled in her chest. She should excuse herself, explain the mix-up, and flee before she made a fool of herself. But Adrian's steady gaze held her in place, and his smile was disarming in a way that made her forget to breathe. He extended his hand across the table, his voice low and commanding, yet strangely gentle. "I am Adrian," he said simply. Emily hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. "Emily," she replied, her voice quieter than she intended. The contact was brief, professional, But something sparked there nonetheless, a flicker of connection that made her pulse race. As the waiter poured the wine, Adrian leaned forward with interest. "Tell me about yourself, Emily." It was such an ordinary question, yet coming from him, it felt extraordinary. This was her chance to escape politely to confess the mistake, but instead she found herself answering honestly. She told him about working 2 jobs, about her dream of designing her own line of sustainable clothing, about the struggle of paying bills while caring for her mother, who lived in Florida with a chronic illness. To her surprise, he did not look bored or dismissive. He listened, truly listened. His eyes softened when she spoke of her sacrifices, and he even laughed quietly at her self-deprecating jokes. It felt natural, effortless, unlike any date she had been on before. Still an unease lingered beneath the warmth. She knew the truth would come out. He was her boss, though several levels above her world. He was the man whose decisions shaped the company where she was just another replaceable employee. Yet at this table in this moment, none of that seemed to matter. For a fleeting evening, Emily allowed herself to forget who he was and let the impossible possibility of connection wash over her. Emily sat across from Adrian, still reeling from the fact that she had stumbled into this moment by accident. She tried to remind herself that she was supposed to be meeting a man named David, someone Sophie had insisted would be perfect for her. Instead, she was now sipping wine with her own CEO, a man who had never so much as noticed her in the crowded hallways of Blackwell Innovations. She was just another junior designer, buried under layers of middle management, while he was the face of the empire, the name on the building. She should have excused herself, but something about the way he leaned in, the genuine way he asked about her life, pinned her to the spot. Adrian listened intently as she spoke about her work, her love of art, and her side projects that paid the bills. He surprised her by asking follow-up questions that proved he had been paying attention. "What kind of art inspires you most?" he asked, his tone neither dismissive nor casual. She blinked, not expecting someone like him to care. "Sketches," she admitted, hesitant at first. "I love fashion design, but in a way that tells a story, not just something people wear once." His expression shifted from polite interest to something more engaged, as if her words struck a chord. "That sounds like vision, not just work," he said. "Most people in this city talk about money or status, but you talk about meaning." It unnerved her how easily he seemed to see through her. She looked away, tracing the rim of her glass, but his gaze did not waver. For the first time in a long time, she felt like someone was truly seeing her, not just what she could provide. Conversation flowed, drifting from her small apartment in Brooklyn to the expensive violin lessons she could never afford as a child, to the way her mother still called every Sunday night, just to make sure she had eaten a proper dinner. Adrian shared stories too, though carefully chosen. He spoke of growing up under immense expectations, of family gatherings that were more about business than love, of a father who had passed away before he could ever really say goodbye. There was an ache in his voice when he admitted that people rarely spoke to him about anything except deals, acquisitions, and stock prices. Emily realized he was lonely, profoundly so, and her heart softened despite herself. At one point, her phone buzzed with a message from Sophie, but she ignored it, unwilling to break the spell. Hours slipped by unnoticed, the candlelight flickering between them. Then, just as Emily began to relax a moment, shattered the illusion. Adrian's phone rang. He excused himself, answering with a curt tone. "Yes, the merger documents will be ready by tomorrow." His voice dropped hard-edged, all warmth replaced with command. As he spoke, Emily caught sight of the name flashing on the screenboard chair. Her breath caught. This was not just a charming stranger. This was Adrian Blackwell, the man who controlled her professional future. The man whose decisions affected hundreds of employees, including herself. A wave of panic surged. She should tell him the truth right now. Explain she was supposed to be at another table, but her tongue felt glued to the roof of her mouth. Instead, she sat frozen as he ended the call, his features softening again as he turned back to her. "Forgive me," he said with a weary smile. "Duty never seems to rest." Emily nodded, her heart thudding. She wanted to ask why he was here, why a man like him was sitting alone at a restaurant when he could have been anywhere with anyone. But before she could, the answer came in the form of his next words. "My cousins set me up for a blind date tonight," he admitted, almost ruefully. "She is late, or maybe she is not coming at all." His smile tilted as he studied her. "But then you arrived." Emily felt her stomach twist. The truth hovered on her lips, but instead she said softly, "Maybe fate had different plans." He chuckled, raising his glass in agreement. Maybe so. As the waiter cleared their plates and offered dessert, Emily caught her reflection in the polished silver tray. She barely recognized the woman staring back. For one evening, she was not the overworked junior designer, scraping by paycheck to paycheck. She was a woman sitting across from a man who, despite his wealth and power, looked at her as though she were the most fascinating person in the room. Yet the weight of reality pressed in. She remembered whispers in the office about Adrian Blackwell, about his ruthless reputation, about the icy distance he kept from employees. But none of that matched the man before her now. This Adrian was laughing at her story about a disastrous college art show, was leaning closer every time she spoke, was watching her with an intensity that made her chest tighten. She wondered if she was imagining the connection, but when his fingers brushed hers as he reached for his glass, the spark was undeniable. At that very moment, Sophie appeared near the entrance, her familiar blonde hair catching Emily's eye. Panic jolted through Emily. Sophie was looking for her, probably scanning for table 14, where David still waited. Emily shrank in her chair, hoping Sophie would not see her, but it was too late. Sophie's gaze landed on her confusion flashing across her face as she realized Emily was not at the right table. Emily's heart pounded. The mistake would be revealed. Adrian would know who she was, and worse, he would know she was his employee. For a brief, selfish moment, Emily wished time would stop right there in the fragile bubble, where nothing else existed but his attention and her laughter. But reality was coming, and she knew the world outside this table was about to intrude. As Sophie began to walk toward them, Emily clutched her glass tighter, bracing for the truth to unravel and everything to change. Sophie's heels clicked against the polished floor as she approached the table, her eyes darting between Emily and Adrian in bewilderment. Emily felt her pulse quicken and wished she could melt into the leather chair. Sophie leaned down and whispered urgently, "Emily, what are you doing here?" "You were supposed to be with David at table 14. Emily's face burned with embarrassment, and she opened her mouth to explain, but Adrian's calm voice interrupted. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his eyes narrowing slightly as they shifted from Emily to Sophie. Sophie straightened, suddenly aware she was standing in front of one of the most powerful men in New York. "No, Mr. Blackwell," she stammered, then looked back at Emily with wide eyes. "Emily, maybe we should talk." Emily wanted the ground to swallow her whole. She glanced at Adrian, his brow furrowed, then at Sophie, who looked as though she could not believe what she was seeing. "This is your boss, Sophie," hissed under her breath, and Emily flinched at the words. Adrian's expression sharpened. "Boss." His gaze settled on Emily, waiting for her to confirm. Her throat tightened, but she finally nodded. "I work at Blackwell Innovations," she admitted softly. "I am a junior designer." She expected him to look disappointed, maybe even annoyed, that she had not been honest from the start. But to her surprise, a slow, curious smile formed instead. "That explains why you seemed familiar," he murmured. His tone was not angry, more intrigued than anything else. Emily felt both relief and dread. Relief that he did not seem furious. Dread that this complicated things beyond repair. Sophie excused herself quickly, muttering something about checking on David, leaving Emily and Adrian in tense silence. Emily fiddled with the edge of her napkin, ashamed. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "I should have told you as soon as I realized. It was a mistake. I sat at the wrong table." Adrian leaned back, studying her with a gaze that was both analytical and strangely gentle. "A mistake, perhaps, but one I am glad you made." His words startled her. "You are not upset?" she asked hesitantly. "Upset, no," he replied. "Intrigued, yes. Most people who sit across from me know exactly who I am and what they want from me. But you, Emily Carter, you talked about dreams and art and your mother's phone calls. That is rare." His voice softened on the last words, and Emily's heart ached with conflicting emotions. She should have excused herself, thanked him politely, and gone to find David. Instead, she stayed rooted to her chair, captivated by the way. He made her feel both seen and unsettled at once. The waiter returned, asking if they wanted dessert. Adrian did not look away from her as he answered, "Yes, the chocolate soufflé and 2 spoons." Emily wanted to protest, to explain again that this was a mistake, but her voice betrayed her, caught between fear and desire. She simply nodded, her hands trembling in her lap. When the soufflé arrived, Adrian slid a spoon toward her. "Tell me, Emily, why did you become a designer?" His question was simple, but it pierced her. She thought of her father, a mechanic who had worked himself into an early grave of her mother, struggling with medical bills of the sketchbooks she had filled since she was a little girl. Because creating something beautiful felt like the only way to rise above everything ugly, she said quietly. His gaze softened, and for a long moment they simply looked at each other, the hum of the restaurant fading into the background. Emily felt dangerously close to forgetting where she was and who he was. After dessert, Adrian insisted on walking her out. On the sidewalk, the night air was crisp, the city buzzing around them. Emily hugged her purse, tightly torn between gratitude and guilt. "Thank you for dinner," she said, her voice tentative. "It was not supposed to happen." "But it did," Adrian replied evenly. "And I am glad it did." Emily hesitated, then blurted out the fear that had been clawing at her since Sophie's interruption. "This could ruin me," she said. "If anyone at work finds out I was here with you, they will think I am trying to use you." He tilted his head, regarding her with quiet intensity. "Are you trying to use me?" She shook her head furiously. "No, of course not." "Then let them think what they will," he said simply. "I know the truth, and that is enough." Emily stared at him, astonished by his confidence. For a moment she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like if the world were not watching, if he were not her boss, if she were not a waitress by night and a junior designer by day. For a fleeting instant it felt possible. But as she rode the subway home later, reality came crashing back. Her phone buzzed with a dozen messages from Sophie, half panicked, half thrilled. Emily ignored them all, staring out at the blur of city lights. She had just spent an evening with Adrian Blackwell, her powerful but lonely CEO, and nothing in her life would ever feel the same again. She knew she should forget it, bury the memory, pretend it never happened. But deep down, a part of her already knew she could not. The way he looked at her, the way he listened, the way he made her feel seen, it had etched itself into her heart. And though she did not want to admit it, she also knew this was only the beginning of something far more complicated than she had ever imagined. The following Monday morning, Emily tried to throw herself into work, burying the memory of that dinner beneath a pile of design drafts and fabric samples. But no matter how hard she focused, her mind kept drifting back to Adrian. Every time she remembered the way he had looked at her, how his voice had softened when she spoke of her dreams, she felt both giddy and terrified. She told herself it had been an accident, a one-time encounter that should never have happened again. Yet when she arrived at her desk that morning, a small box was waiting, with her name neatly written on the card. Her hands shook as she opened it, revealing a single white lily and a note that read simply, "Thank you for dinner. A Blackwell." Her heart raced. It was discreet, not ostentatious, but the meaning was clear. He had sought her out. She tucked the flower into her bag quickly, before anyone could see her pulse thundering. The day dragged on in a haze. At lunch, her phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. "Join me for lunch. Conference room 6A." She nearly dropped her phone. She should not go, she knew, but curiosity overpowered fear. When she slipped quietly into the glass-walled room, Adrian was already there, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, looking less like a CEO and more like a man weary from battles no one else could see. He gestured for her to sit, and she obeyed, nerves buzzing. "You did not have to send me anything," she said quickly. "People will talk." "Let them," he replied evenly. Then he leaned forward. "I wanted to see you again, without the noise, without the titles. Just us." The simplicity of his words cut through her defenses. They ate together, a catered spread far better than anything she could afford, and he asked about her sketches, her ideas, her vision. Emily hesitated, but then pulled out the small notebook she always carried. She showed him rough designs, pencil lines, imperfect, but full of passion. He turned the pages slowly, his expression unreadable, until finally he said, "These are remarkable. You see people, not just clothes." She felt heat rise to her cheeks, overwhelmed that he understood. That afternoon, she returned to her cubicle with her heart in chaos, caught between exhilaration and dread. Days turned into weeks, and Adrian continued to reach out. Sometimes it was a note left on her desk, other times a text inviting her to coffee or lunch. She resisted at first, fearful of whispers, but his persistence was never demanding, always patient. Against her better judgment, she found herself meeting him more often. One evening he asked her to join him at a quiet jazz bar on the Upper West Side. Emily almost said no, but something in his voice made her agree. The bar was dimly lit, the music smooth and melancholy, the kind of place where time seemed to blur. Adrian sat across from her, his glass untouched, as he listened to the saxophone, and then he said softly, "Do you know what I envy about you, Emily? You speak freely. You tell the truth, even when it makes you vulnerable. In my world, everyone wears masks." She met his gaze, and for the first time, she saw not the untouchable CEO, but a man burdened by isolation. He told her about the pressure of running the company, about the endless expectations of shareholders and family, about how he could not remember the last time someone spoke to him without an agenda. "I have everything," he admitted, his voice low, "but at night, when the city goes quiet, I have nothing." Emily's heart twisted. She wanted to reach across the table to offer comfort, but she stopped herself. Instead, she said softly, "You are not nothing to me." The words slipped out before she could catch them, and the look in his eyes told her he had heard more than she intended. After that night, their closeness grew. Adrian began sharing pieces of his world with her. He invited her to his office late one evening, where the city skyline glittered beyond floor-to-ceiling windows. He showed her a side of himself no one else saw, standing barefoot on the balcony with a glass of wine, speaking not as a CEO, but as a man searching for meaning. Emily confessed more of her own past, too. The nights she skipped meals to save money, the times she doubted she would ever climb out of the shadows of poverty, the dream that one day she would walk into a store and see her own designs on display. Their conversations swung like a pendulum, moments of laughter, giving way to quiet revelations, playful teasing followed by raw confessions. Emily began to dread the hours apart and live for the stolen moments together. Yet even as her heart leaned toward him, fear gnawed at her. She saw the looks from coworkers, the whispers in hallways, the raised eyebrows whenever she disappeared during lunch. She knew rumors were already circling, and that sooner or later the truth would burst open. But every time she thought of walking away, she remembered the softness in Adrian's eyes when he listened to her, the rare smiles that transformed his features, the way his presence made her feel like she mattered in a world that constantly told her she did not. One Friday evening, as rain tapped against her apartment window, there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find Adrian, damp from the storm, holding takeout containers. "I thought you might not have eaten," he said simply. Stepping inside as though he belonged, they sat cross-legged on the floor, eating noodles from paper boxes, laughing at how ordinary it felt. Then silence settled heavy with unspoken things. Adrian set his food aside and looked at her with a seriousness that made her chest ache. "Emily," he said, "I do not want this to be stolen. Hours and hidden glances. I want you to know that you are more than a distraction to me." She froze, words caught in her throat. All she could manage was, "You should not say that. You are my boss." His hand brushed hers, firm yet trembling. "Tonight, I am just a man," he whispered, "and you are the only person who makes me feel alive." The confession hung in the air, dangerous and beautiful. Emily knew she should end it, protect herself, protect her job, but her heart betrayed her, surging toward him. In that moment, she understood the truth. She was already his, in ways neither of them could undo. The following week at Blackwell Innovations, the atmosphere shifted. Emily noticed the glances, first the way conversations halted when she entered the break room, the forced smiles, from colleagues who never used to notice her at all. At first, she tried to brush it off, telling herself she was imagining things, but then came the whispers. Someone had seen her leave the building with Adrian late at night. Someone else claimed they spotted them at the jazz bar. The rumors spread like wildfire, and before long, the words gold digger and sleeping her way up began echoing in the corners of the office. Emily fought to keep her head down, focusing on her design projects, but each day grew harder. Her supervisor, usually supportive, now spoke to her with clipped tones, and meetings became uncomfortable, as people avoided eye contact. She could feel the invisible wall rising around her, isolating her. Adrian noticed. He called her into his office one evening after most employees had gone home. She stepped inside, nervously aware that anyone who saw her would have more to whisper about. Adrian stood by the window, the city skyline glowing behind him, his expression unreadable. "They are talking," he said quietly. "I know," Emily admitted, her voice tight. "It is ruining me." He turned, his jaw clenched. "I can put a stop to it. One word from me and the gossip ends." But she shook her head firmly. "That would only make it worse. They would think I needed your protection. I need to prove I belong here on my own merit." Adrian's gaze softened, but his frustration was clear. You should not have to prove anything. Yet she knew the reality. In his world, power silenced critics, but in hers, whispers could destroy a career. A few days later came her most difficult trial yet. Adrian invited her to a family gathering, insisting it would be casual, just dinner. Emily hesitated, but agreed, hoping to show she was not ashamed of being with him. The Blackwell estate in Connecticut was a world far removed from her own. The mansion loomed with columns and sprawling lawns, servants moving with silent efficiency. Inside, chandeliers sparkled above guests, dressed in designer labels. Emily wore her best dress, but as she stepped into the grand hall, she felt every eye sweep over her, measuring her worth and finding her lacking. Catherine Blackwell. Adrian's mother approached with the grace of a queen. Tall, poised, and immaculate in a pearl necklace, she extended a hand that was cool to the touch. "So you are the young woman Adrian has been spending time with." Her tone was polite, but edged with steel. Emily smiled nervously, trying to be respectful. "It is an honor to meet you, Mrs. Blackwell." Catherine's eyes flickered over Emily's dress, her shoes, her nervous stance. "Tell me, dear, what does your family do?" Her voice was deceptively casual, but Emily felt the trap. "My father was a mechanic," she said quietly, "and my mother is retired now due to health issues." Catherine's smile did not falter, but her eyes hardened. How humble! Adrian stepped in quickly, his arm brushing Emily's. "Mother enough." Catherine arched a brow but said nothing more. Dinner was no easier. Around the table, relatives spoke of business ventures, art acquisitions, summer homes in Europe. Emily tried to contribute, but her voice was drowned out. Every time she glanced up, she found Catherine watching her with thinly veiled disdain. When dessert arrived, Catherine delivered the final blow. Turning to Adrian, she said smoothly, "Adrian Vanessa Pierce has been asking about you. Her family will be at the charity gala next month. It would be a suitable match." Emily stiffened her fork, clattering against the plate. Vanessa Pierce. She had heard the name whispered in the office, the heiress of a powerful family known for her ruthless charm. Adrian's jaw tightened. "I am not interested," he said coldly. Catherine's smile never wavered. "You should be." Emily excused herself to the bathroom, her eyes burning. She splashed water on her face, whispering to her reflection, "You do not belong here." When she returned, Adrian pulled her aside, his hand warm against hers. "Ignore her," he said firmly. "She sees only status, not people." But Emily's heart was heavy. Later that week, Vanessa appeared in the lobby of Blackwell Innovations. She was stunning with perfect blonde waves and a tailored suit that screamed power. She greeted Adrian with a kiss on the cheek, lingering too long, then turned to Emily with a smile that cut like glass. "So you are the assistant," she said sweetly. Adrian corrected her. "Emily is a designer, but the damage was done." Vanessa's eyes glittered with challenge. "It must be exciting for you," she purred, being so close to Adrian. Emily forced a polite smile, but inside she was crumbling. Every encounter with Vanessa, every icy glance from Catherine, every whisper in the office added weight to her shoulders. She found herself avoiding Adrian, afraid of dragging him further into scandal, afraid of being the reason his reputation suffered. Yet he pursued her, still relentless in his quiet way, showing up with coffee in the mornings, leaving notes of encouragement on her desk, reminding her that he saw her as more than the gossip. One evening after another, grueling day of whispers and stares, she confronted him. "This is tearing me apart, Adrian. I cannot be the reason people doubt you." He stepped closer, his eyes burning with conviction. "Let them doubt. I do not care." "I do," she whispered. "I care because I have nothing else. This job, my reputation, my dignity. If I lose those, what do I have left?" He reached for her hand, but she pulled back, tears welling. "I need to find my place in this world without hiding behind your name." He wanted to argue, but the pain in her voice silenced him. They stood in the dim light of his office, the city spread out like a sea of diamonds below, and for the first time, Emily felt the distance between their worlds stretch wide and cruel. She loved the man before her, but she hated the life that came with him. And deep down, she knew this conflict was only beginning. The night of the Blackwell Foundation charity gala arrived with all the grandeur of old New York. The ballroom at the Plaza Hotel shimmered with crystal chandeliers, velvet drapes, and guests dressed in couture gowns and tuxedos. For Emily, it was a surreal dream turned nightmare waiting to happen. Adrian had insisted she come with him despite her protests. He told her she belonged at his side, not hidden in the shadows. She had tried to believe him, had chosen a borrowed dress Sophie had found at a vintage shop, and forced herself to hold her head high. But the moment they stepped through the gilded doors, cameras flashed and murmurs rippled. She clutched Adrian's arm tighter, every nerve screaming she did not belong. Paparazzi swarmed the entrance, their voices sharp and merciless. "Adrian Blackwell, who is your date tonight? Who is she? What does she do? Do you plan to marry her?" The barrage left Emily, stunned, her cheeks flaming. Adrian pulled her close, shielding her with his broad frame, but the damage was already done. One photographer shouted crudely, "How does it feel to snag a billionaire paycheck?" Miss Carter Emily froze. They knew her name. Gasps and laughter rippled through the crowd. Her heart pounded as she realized someone had leaked her identity to the press. Before she could recover, a familiar voice sliced through the noise. Vanessa Pierce glided down the marble steps in a silver gown, radiating elegance and superiority. She stopped just a few feet away, her smile calculated for the cameras. "Adrian," she cooed, "I did not know you would be bringing someone." Her eyes flicked over Emily with disdain. She turned slightly toward the reporters and said in a voice just loud enough to carry. I suppose everyone deserves a chance to play dress up. The crowd tittered, and Emily's stomach dropped. Adrian's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, another reporter shouted, "Emily Carter is an employee at Blackwell Innovations, correct? How convenient." The phrase landed like a blow. The implication was clear. She was using her position to climb into Adrian's life. Phones flashed, capturing her humiliation. Vanessa leaned in closer to Adrian, her perfume cloying her words, dripping venom. "You really should be more careful, Adrian. These kinds of choices reflect poorly on your judgment." Emily felt the room spin, every eye dissecting her presence, every whisper tearing at her. She tried to steady her breathing, but tears stung her eyes. "I cannot do this," she whispered, attempting to pull away. Adrian grasped her hand firmly, his protective instinct flaring, but she shook her head. "Please let me go." He hesitated, caught between defending her and respecting her plea. In that moment, Vanessa smiled triumphantly, and the cameras caught it all. Emily fled to the powder room, locking herself inside, clutching the porcelain sink as sobs broke free. Her reflection in the mirror mocked her makeup, smudged shoulders, trembling the picture of a woman undone. She had tried to belong, and instead she had become the evening's entertainment. Outside, the gala continued, but inside Emily battled shame so raw it left her shaking. Meanwhile, Adrian confronted Vanessa. Enough, he snapped, his voice cold as ice. "You will not speak of her again." Vanessa's eyes widened at his tone, but she recovered quickly. "You think protecting her will save you, but the board, the press, your family, they will never accept her. She is nothing in their world." Adrian's fists clenched at his sides. Then their world is wrong. He turned away from her, determined to find Emily, but by the time he reached the powder room door, she was gone, slipping out a side exit into the night. Outside the hotel, the paparazzi pounced again. Emily tried to cover her face, but microphones shoved toward her. "Miss Carter, how long have you been involved with Mr. Blackwell? Are you hoping for a settlement? Are you pregnant?" The cruel questions made her stumble. She wanted to scream to vanish, but she was trapped in a storm of flashing lights and mocking voices. Security tried to hold the crowd back, but the damage was done. By morning, the headlines were merciless. Gold digger targets billionaire boss. Waitress turned designer plays her cards right. Social media exploded with memes mocking her dress, her background. Even her trembling hands caught on video. At work, the atmosphere turned toxic. Some colleagues avoided her altogether, others smirked openly. She found a note on her desk that read, "Climb higher, sweetheart," written in cruel scrawl. Her supervisor called her into the office, the conversation cold. "Given recent developments, it is inappropriate for you to continue working here. We cannot risk conflict of interest." Emily's chest caved as the words sank in. She had lost her job, her reputation, everything she had fought to build. When she left the building box of belongings in her arms, whispers followed her down the hallway. She reached the street and inhaled the sharp city air, feeling more alone than ever. Adrian called, texted, even showed up at her apartment, but she ignored him. She needed space, needed to salvage the pieces of her dignity that still remained. In her mind, his world and hers could never coexist. She could not bear being the subject of ridicule, the punchline of society's cruel jokes. That night, Emily sat on her bed, scrolling through the hateful articles until she could not take it anymore. Tears blurred her vision. She thought of her mother, fragile and ill, who had always believed in her. She thought of her father, who would have told her to stand tall no matter what. She whispered to herself, "You have to be stronger than this." But strength felt impossible. Across town, Adrian paced his penthouse, furious at the way the world had devoured her. He wanted to tear down every headline, silence every voice that dared to insult her. But Emily's silence cut deeper than any insult. He knew he could wield power to protect her, but he also knew she needed to feel she could stand on her own. He was trapped between the man he had to be and the man he longed to be for her. In the days that followed, Emily disappeared from his orbit, leaving him in a silence that grew heavier each night. He watched her from afar through articles and photographs, aching to bridge the distance, but terrified of pushing her further away. And Emily, though her heart longed for him, told herself over and over that love was not enough to withstand the cruelty of a world that had already judged her guilty. The public humiliation had broken something fragile inside her, and she did not know if it could ever be mended. Emily moved through the days as if she were underwater, each step heavy, each breath shallow. After losing her job, she picked up extra shifts at the cafe where she had worked before. But even there, whispers followed. Customers recognized her from the viral video at the gala, and she heard the cruel comments murmured just loud enough to sting. Some laughed at her, others pitied her, and she hated both reactions equally. She kept her head down, focused on steaming milk and scrubbing counters, but the humiliation clung to her like a second skin. At night, she lay awake in her small Brooklyn apartment, scrolling through her phone until the hateful headlines blurred into a haze. Each story painted her as a schemer, a girl from nothing who had set her sights on the richest bachelor in Manhattan. They did not write about the long nights she spent sketching designs, or the years she sacrificed to support her mother, or the fact that she had never wanted anything from Adrian, except the way he made her feel seen. Her heart ached with longing, but every time his name lit up her phone, she pressed ignore. Adrian, meanwhile, was unraveling in his own way. In the sleek isolation of his penthouse, he paced the marble floors, fury boiling at the injustice. He wanted to storm into the offices of every newspaper crush, every gossip column, and shut down every social media thread that dared to defame her. But he knew brute force would only feed the narrative. He sent her flowers letters, voicemails full of apologies and pleas, but she remained silent. His board grew restless. Shareholders muttering about his distraction, his mother Catherine pressing him to end the relationship for good. At one dinner she said coolly, "You have responsibilities to this family, Adrian. We cannot afford for you to throw it away for a woman who cannot survive the spotlight." Adrian's jaw clenched, his voice sharp. "She is not just a woman. She is the only one who ever saw me truly saw me." Catherine's eyes narrowed. "That may be, but she will never be accepted. And acceptance, Adrian, is everything." He left the dinner early, rage simmering. Yet when he returned home to an empty apartment, the silence echoed louder than his anger. He missed Emily more than he could articulate. Days bled into weeks. Emily found herself avoiding the parts of the city where she might see Adrian's face on billboards or screens. She poured herself into freelance design work, sketching late into the night. But nothing filled the hollow space inside her. Sophie tried to console her, bringing wine and pizza, urging her to call Adrian. "He loves you," Sophie insisted. He would burn the world for you." Emily shook her head, tears brimming. "That is exactly the problem. I do not want him to burn the world. I want him to have a world where he can thrive, and I cannot give him that. I am poison to him now." Sophie gripped her hand. "You are not poison. You are his cure." But Emily could not believe it. She thought of the paparazzi flashes, the mocking headlines, Catherine's cold eyes, Vanessa's smirk. She could not endure dragging him through more scandal. Meanwhile, Vanessa seized the opportunity. She appeared at Adrian's office with perfectly timed concern, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I heard about Emily," she murmured. "It must be exhausting for you." Adrian dismissed her curtly, but the seed of doubt she tried to plant lingered. Could love really withstand the onslaught of power family and public scrutiny? Emily's silence gnawed at him until one night he drove to her apartment. He stood outside her door, rain slicking his hair, his fist raised to knock. But through the thin walls he heard her sobs quiet and broken, and his resolve crumbled. He could not force his way back into her life. He turned and walked away, the rain hiding the tears he did not want to admit were falling. Emily, unaware he had been there, cried herself to sleep, clutching the sketchbook that had once been her solace. She drew designs of gowns she would never make dresses. No one would wear her pencil strokes, jagged with despair. The next morning she resolved to move forward alone. She began applying for jobs outside the fashion industry, considering anything that would pay the bills. Each rejection deepened her conviction that she had been foolish to believe she could straddle Adrian's world and her own. Across the city, Adrian attended, meeting after meeting, his focus fractured. Investors complained of his distraction projects stalled, and his name began to appear in business articles, not as a titan of success, but as a man compromised by scandal. His loneliness grew unbearable. He replayed every moment with Emily, the way she laughed, the softness in her eyes, the honesty in her voice. He wondered if she remembered too, or if she was already erasing him. One evening he found himself at the jazz bar where they had shared their first quiet night together. The music washed over him, but without her across the table, it felt hollow. He left after one drink, the ache in his chest heavier than ever. Weeks later, Emily walked past a newsstand and saw Adrian's face on the cover of a magazine, the headline proclaiming, "Billionaire Blackwell under fire." Her chest tightened. She wanted to reach out to tell him she still believed in him, but fear held her back. She was convinced she would only make things worse. The separation had carved them both raw two souls, tethered by longing but pulled apart by pride-fear and the merciless gaze of the world. Emily whispered to herself at night, "I love him, but love is not enough." Adrian whispered to himself in his empty penthouse, "I love her, and without her, nothing is enough." Both hearts broke silently apart, yet still bound, waiting for the moment fate would force them to face each other again. It was a gray Saturday morning when Emily walked to the cafe for her shift, the cold wind cutting through her coat. She carried her sketchbook in her bag, though lately she had stopped drawing. The joy had drained from her, leaving only routine. As she approached the entrance, she noticed a small crowd gathered, cameras, raised voices buzzing. Her stomach sank. Paparazzi. She quickened her pace, keeping her head down, but the moment she pulled the door open, flashes exploded. Reporters surged forward, shouting her name. "Emily Carter, do you regret deceiving Adrian Blackwell?" Emily, were you using him for money? Emily, do you think you ruined his reputation? Her breath caught as microphones pressed toward her face. The crush of bodies overwhelming. She tried to push through, but questions flew sharper, crueler. Are you pregnant with his child? Is that why he kept you? Emily froze, humiliated, her cheeks burning. Customers inside the cafe stared through the windows, some with pity, others with morbid fascination. She felt trapped like prey, surrounded by predators. Then suddenly the crowd shifted voices, rising cameras turning. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb, its headlights slicing through the chaos. The back door opened, and Adrian stepped out tall and commanding, rain darkening his overcoat. Gasps rippled through the reporters as he strode forward, his eyes locked on Emily. Without hesitation, he pushed past the flashing cameras, his hand reaching for her. She stumbled back, but he caught her firmly, pulling her against him. His arm wrapped around her shoulders, shielding her from the onslaught. If you want a story, he said, his voice carrying above the noise, write this. She is the only woman I have ever loved. Silence fell for a beat, the words echoing in the stunned air. The cameras clicked furiously, but Adrian did not care. He bent his head closer to Emily, his voice fierce but tender. I am done hiding, Emily. Done letting them tear us apart. I love you. Emily's throat tightened, her tears spilling freely now. The reporters shouted again, but the words blurred, meaningless compared to the man holding her. Adrian guided her through the mob, opening the car door and ushering her inside. As the driver pulled away, Emily pressed her hands to her face, trembling. You should not have come, she whispered. They will twist this, make it worse for you. Adrian leaned closer, his voice low and steady. Let them. I do not care about shareholders or headlines. I care about you. She looked at him, his eyes raw with sincerity, and for the first time she saw the cracks in his armor. He was tired, vulnerable, but utterly certain. Why, she asked, why risk everything for me? He took her hand, lifting it to his lips. Because without you, all of it means nothing. The car sped through the city, carrying them away from the chaos. Hours later, they arrived at his penthouse, but this time it did not feel cold or distant. Adrian guided her inside, settling her on the couch, making her tea, as though afraid she might vanish. He sat across from her, his hands restless. Emily, he said, I cannot promise the world will be kind, but I can promise you this. I will fight for us every day. You will never be alone in this again. Emily's chest ached with longing and fear. I do not want to be a scandal, Adrian. I do not want to ruin your life. He shook his head, his jaw firm. You are not a scandal. You are my life. His words shattered the last barrier she had built. She broke into sobs, and he moved to her side, holding her as she cried. For a long time they sat in silence, the city lights flickering outside, two souls clinging to each other. In the days that followed, Adrian made his stand publicly. He refused board pressure to distance himself from Emily. At a press conference, he declared his relationship with her, openly calling her intelligent, talented, and the woman he trusted above all others. The media erupted, but for every cruel headline, there were voices of support too. Ordinary people admired his defiance, applauding his refusal to bow to tradition or power. For Emily, the transition was agonizing but transformative. She returned to her sketches, encouraged by Adrian's faith in her. He helped connect her with mentors, but he never overshadowed her. You need to shine on your own, he told her. I just want to be the one standing beside you when you do." Slowly, she began to believe again. One evening, weeks after the rescue, Adrian took her to a community art center he had quietly funded. Inside, young designers worked on sewing machines, students sketched at long tables, laughter and creativity filling the air. "I wanted you to see this," he said softly. "This is what I want to build with you. A legacy not of money but of meaning." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "You did this for me, for us," he corrected gently, "for every dreamer like you." That night, as they stood on the rooftop of the center, the skyline glowing, Adrian cupped her face in his hands. "Emily, I do not want perfection. I do not want society's approval. I just want us." He kissed her, then slow and certain, sealing the promise he had made in front of the world. And for the first time since their story began, Emily allowed herself to believe they might truly withstand the storms together. Emily stood on the rooftop of the art center, the city glittering behind Adrian, her heart beating with a rhythm she had not felt in months. His kiss still lingered on her lips, his words echoing in her mind. "I just want us." She wanted to believe, but doubt still clung stubbornly. Love alone could not erase the cruel headlines or the judgmental stares. She pulled back slightly, searching his face. "Adrian, what if this is not enough? What if the world keeps tearing us apart?" He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, his eyes steady. "Then we let them tear, and when the dust settles, we will still be standing." She shook her head, struggling. "You do not understand. I have already lost my job, my reputation. I do not know who I am anymore, except the girl who humiliated herself in front of the entire city." Adrian cupped her hands in his. "Then let me remind you who you are. You are Emily Carter, a woman who sketches beauty on scraps of paper after 12-hour shifts. A woman who cares for her mother when no one else is watching, a woman who walked into my life by accident and made me realize how empty it was. You are not defined by gossip. You are defined by the strength I see every time you refuse to give up." Emily's chest tightened with emotion. His conviction was unshakable, and for the first time she allowed herself to lean into it. Over the next weeks, he proved himself not with grand gestures, but with quiet constancy. He attended her small freelance showings, applauded her designs, and even brought investors to see her work without telling them who she was to him. He introduced her not as his girlfriend, but as a designer he believed in. Slowly, the narrative shifted. Articles began to highlight her talent instead of mocking her. She received an offer to collaborate with a boutique in Soho, and when she told Adrian, he smiled with pride, but kept his distance, letting her own merit shine. One afternoon, she walked into the art center again and found him surrounded by students listening intently to their ideas. He looked at her across the room, and for the first time she realized he was not just fighting for her. He was building a life that could hold them both. That evening, as they walked along the Hudson River, Emily stopped staring out at the water. "I am scared, Adrian. Scared that loving you means losing myself." He stepped behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Then do not lose yourself. Keep your dreams, your independence, your fire. I will never take those from you. I only want to walk beside them." She leaned into him, the wind cold against her face, but his warmth anchoring her. "Maybe," she whispered, "maybe we could be enough." Adrian turned her to face him, his eyes searching hers. "Emily, I have spent years surrounded by power, wealth, and ambition, but none of it ever made me feel alive." "You did." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box. Her breath caught as he opened it, revealing a simple ring, a single diamond set in a delicate band. No extravagance, no spectacle, just sincerity. He lowered himself to one knee on the river walk, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. I am not asking you to step into my world. I am asking you to let me share yours. Will you marry me? Emily's tears spilled freely as she stared down at him. The man the world saw as powerful, untouchable, lonely, was kneeling before her vulnerable and open. She thought of everything they had endured, the humiliation, the separation, the rescue, and realized this was the choice that mattered most. She dropped to her knees, too, taking his face in her hands. Yes, she whispered through her tears. Yes, Adrian, I will. He slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling, and then he pulled her into his arms, kissing her as the city roared around them. For once, the noise did not matter. The world could shout, judge, gossip, but here in this moment, they were unshakable. They walked back hand in hand, Emily glancing at the ring that glittered softly under the streetlights. She felt a peace she had not known in years. She was still Emily Carter, still the girl who sketched dreams in the margins. But now she was also the woman who had been chosen not for status or beauty, but for the truth of who she was. And for the first time, she believed Adrian when he said love was enough. The wedding was nothing like the world expected from Adrian Blackwell. There were no glittering chandeliers or ballrooms filled with dignitaries, no endless lines of paparazzi allowed behind velvet ropes. Instead, he and Emily chose a quiet stretch of California coastline, where the cliffs kissed the Pacific and wildflowers grew along the sand. The ceremony was small, intimate, with Sophie standing proudly as maid of honor and a handful of close friends seated in white wooden chairs. Emily wore a gown she designed herself simple and flowing with lace that caught the breeze, while Adrian stood in a charcoal suit, his eyes never leaving hers. As the minister spoke, Emily thought of the path that had led her here. The blind date gone wrong, the humiliation, the heartbreak, the nights, when she believed she would never survive the weight of his world. Yet here she was, holding his hands stronger than she had ever imagined, standing beside the man who had chosen her not in spite of her flaws, but because of them. When Adrian said his vows, his voice trembled for the first time she had ever heard. I built empires, he said. I conquered boardrooms. I carried the weight of a family name, but nothing made sense until you. I love you not for what you give me, but for the way you see me. Emily's tears slipped down her cheeks as she replied, I thought love was out of reach, that my world could never touch yours. But you showed me that love is not about fitting into expectations. It is about fighting for each other, even when the world fights against us. With those words, the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Adrian kissed her beneath the open sky as waves crashed below, sealing a promise that had survived fire and storm. Afterward, at the reception, a modest tent set up on the beach. Catherine Blackwell surprised everyone by approaching Emily. The older woman's posture was as regal as ever, but her eyes softened as she spoke. I misjudged you, she admitted quietly. I thought love was weakness. You proved it is the only strength that matters. Emily, stunned, smiled through her tears as Catherine pressed her hand gently. Adrian watched from nearby relief, flickering across his features. Even Vanessa appeared lingering at the edge of the reception, her expression unreadable. She did not speak, only raised her glass in a silent toast before disappearing into the night. Emily suspected the chapter with Vanessa was not fully closed, but she no longer felt threatened. She had faced the worst and endured. Weeks later, Emily opened the doors to her own studio in Soho. The sign above the window read Carter Designs, and in the display mannequins wore gowns born from years of sketches in her worn notebook. Adrian attended the opening but stood back, letting her take the spotlight. Cameras came this time not for scandal, but to celebrate a rising designer. When a reporter asked Emily how it felt, she smiled with quiet pride. "It feels like a beginning." Adrian beamed from across the room, pride shining in his eyes. Their life together was not without challenges. Rumors still surfaced, whispers still circled at society events, but Emily no longer crumbled beneath them. She had Adrian's unwavering love and her own growing success, and together those gave her strength. On quiet evenings, they would sit on their balcony, overlooking the city, Emily sketching while Adrian read, their fingers intertwined on the armrest between them. Sometimes he would look at her and whisper, "I still cannot believe fate gave me you by mistake." She would laugh, reminding him that it had been her clumsiness, not fate, that landed her at the wrong table. But deep down they both knew it had been destiny all along. One autumn afternoon, Emily visited her mother in Florida, bringing Adrian with her. Watching Adrian kneel beside her mother's wheelchair, listening with patience and care, Emily's heart swelled. This was the life she had once believed impossible, and now it was hers. Months turned into a year, and the world slowly adjusted to the image of Adrian Blackwell with a woman who had once been mocked as unworthy. They saw the truth, a love that endured ridicule, rejection, and relentless pressure, yet only grew stronger. Emily learned that fairy tales did not come from glass slippers or castles, but from resilience, honesty, and the courage to fight for love against all odds. On the anniversary of their wedding, they returned to the same stretch of California coast. They walked barefoot along the sand, hand in hand, as the sun dipped low. Adrian paused, pulling her close, his eyes reflecting the fading light. "I told you once that you were the only one who made me feel alive. That is still true." And Emily, smiling, whispered back, "And you were the only one who made me believe love was real." They kissed as waves lapped at their feet, and for a moment the world around them disappeared, leaving only the two of them and the endless horizon. In the distance, unseen, Vanessa watched from a cliff above her eyes, narrowed her glass of champagne untouched. A faint smirk curved her lips as she turned away, the wind catching her gown. The story was not over, not completely, but for now Emily and Adrian's love stood unshaken, a beacon against the storm. And in that moment, on that quiet shore, they knew they had written their own ending, one not dictated by power or expectation, but by a love strong enough to withstand anything.